The windmills froze, so the power grid failed.
Tucker Carlson is lying to you. Hi, I'm Matt, and welcome to my channel where I make videos in the spare time that I'm not looking for a job. Originally, I wasn't going to make this video, but there was enough misinformation and just lies from people like my boy Tuck behind me and others on the right wing. Others like Congressman Lauren Boebert, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, previous Texas Governor and previous Energy Secretary Rick Perry, and the entire Wall Street Journal editorial board, among others, that I felt a certain compulsion to make the video. Luckily, there have been some already pushing back on this misinformation, but not really to the same degree of big names like those on the right. So hopefully this video can help a teensy bit with that. And before I get into the video proper, I want to say, repping the NASA drip, NASA just landed a new rover on Mars, Perseverance, that has a little helicopter on top of it. This was yesterday, and so the next couple of years are going to be filled with Perseverance and Ingenuity, cool pictures and information and science, which is lit. So on to the video. Actually, firstly, no, wind power, or windmills as Tucker disparagingly calls them, are not the cause of Texas's recent pretty horrific grid failure. There is surprisingly little factual basis to Tucker's piece or other criticisms using this example as kind of a microcosm of how renewable energy is going to lead to the destruction of America. Looking at the facts, cold as they may be to the ideological biases of these pundits, politicians, and publications, we see a totally different story. KXAN, a local NBC affiliate news station, reports on the situation with information from ERCOT, or ERCOT, the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, which is the name of the council that manages Texas's power grid and also the name of the power grid itself, which is kind of confusing. And I'm just quoting the news report right here. On Monday, frozen instruments and a limited gas supply forced 30,000 megawatt hours of power offline. This was half of what ERCOT believed they would need. According to the agency, wind turbines account for less than 13% of the total generation that was lost, the majority of which was coal and gas. So yes, there are some issues with renewable energies during extreme weather events, but those issues are only a sliver of a larger problem that has left hundreds of thousands in the dark. That's it, the narrative crumbles. This was not a failure of renewable energy. It was a failure of Texan energy, wind power being part of it, but to a major degree the ever-loved coal and gas. This is a major issue, obviously, as we can see in the negative effects it's had for hundreds of thousands and millions of people. And Texan wind power is not left out of that indictment. But the failure's inclusion of the more reliable methane and coal show that the big chunk of the problem had to do with sector-wide preparedness and contingency planning, which is then made worse by such self-flagellatingly tendencies as having a power grid separate from the power grid of the rest of the country. Now, much of this Texas was warned about in the past, but the apparent Lone Star environment of favoring recommendation over enforceable regulation and not seeing the potential to profit from such costly expenditures as cold proofing or winterizing through better insulation or windshielding, and just plain demonization of the concept of regulation in general, seems to have contributed to the lack of preparedness. Now, Tucker has some pretty egregious lies in his piece, so I wanted to highlight just a few of those specifically.
Why don't you go yourself, you tiny brain?
The windmills froze, so the power grid failed.
Note the use of windmills, a subtle way to downplay the seriousness and legitimacy of just what's another power source. Unless Tucker thought for some reason Texas was solely dependent on wind power, or for some other reason wind power was the crux of the whole Texas power grid, this is so reductive and just blatantly wrong that it betrays the level of understanding of energy to probably a middle school level. If he wanted to argue that the reduced wind power caused extra strain on an already strained power grid, he could make that argument, though to be clear, he very much is not making that argument in his piece, but that argument could be reversed into the direction against fossil fuels as well. The argument goes both ways, that losing power in one area will cause extra strain in your other areas that might still be producing power.
Running out of energy in Texas is like starving to death at the grocery store. You can only do it on purpose. And Texas did.
As we saw previously, not really. You can only do it if you don't find it reasonable to prepare for worst case or even just bad case scenarios. Like strong cold snaps, which have happened before in Texas and have affected the power grid before. Texas could have taken stronger efforts to enforce weatherization changes in the power grid as a whole, so there would be less failures across the board, from wind power to fossil fuels. All energy sources could have benefited more from more preparation, but seeing government regulation as a boogeyman, they, to the dismay of suffering Texans, did not. And to be clear, these kinds of weatherization technologies exist elsewhere. Other places use wind power and fossil fuel power that are much colder than Texas is normally, so these temperatures in Texas are similar to what those temperatures, say, in parts of Canada might be like for much larger expected parts of the year. Now, there's definitely truth in that a power grid will suffer whenever there's very unexpected power usage, but the kinds of failures that happen in Texas are compounded by the fact that a lot of the energy sources and grid in Texas was not prepared for colder weather, which was a known possibility, and as I said, Texas was warned about.
15 years ago, there were virtually no wind farms in Texas. Last year, roughly a quarter of all electricity generated in the state came from wind. Local politicians were pleased by this. They bragged about it like there was something virtuous about destroying the landscape and degrading the power grid.
Destroying the landscape? Wind, not fossil fuels? Not coal? Not glacier melting? Not mountaintop removal? Those don't count as destroying the landscape, but windmills destroy the landscape? This is just such a terrible take that I can't even handle it, so I'm going to call on my boy Willie Nelson to help with it.
The fruited plain of America, America, God shed His grace on me. And
There's the landscape, Tucker. And that's technically not part of the landscape, but I think it's pretty bad and it counts. There's nothing to be said about how wind turbines destroy the landscape more than fossil fuels, especially when fossil fuels add to tons of additional problems, not even counting global warming and climate change. How about 8 million deaths a year from air pollution caused by fossil fuel burning? Or the history of black lung in coal miners in the US. The material suffering that these energy sources can cause goes beyond anything in comparison about aesthetic values that wind turbines might offend in you, Tucker.
So it was all working great until the day it got cold outside. The windmills failed, like the silly fashion accessories they are, and people in Texas died.
Yes, until it got cold and Texas realized that all the recommendations that should have been regulations were not implemented. Proper steps were not taken for when it got cold outside for wind or for fossil fuels. And speaking of belittling wind, it's good to know that Denmark is a country which gets over 50% or over half of its electricity from silly fashion. And it's probably on track to be able to produce all of its electricity from wind power in the coming years. Now, I could go on about how Tuck claims that his opponents are denying science when he doesn't think climate change is a thing, insulting the Bidens at the same time with the really weird insults.
Their love is as real as climate change.
Granted, I'm not Tucker's base, but it doesn't read like a good look to me. Or how he claims wind turbines are ferocious bird killers.
Humming and buzzing and chopping up birds. That's what a wind turbine is. A massive power plant in your backyard. Humming and buzzing and chopping up birds. 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 That's what a wind turbine is.
Coal kills over 20 times the number of birds annually, not to mention the people that coal kills. Or how I could talk about how he claimed that wind power or other green energy only exists so that a small elite can get rich off subsidies.
A tiny number of people profit from it, from government subsidies and regulated prices. Everyone else gets a moral lecture about climate change.
Fossil fuels have had over 4 times as many subsidies in their lifetime as renewable energies. Or even how he said, now a single major American city is prettier or more functional than it was in the 1950s. I mean, Tucker, you know what smog is, right? You know Los Angeles in the 1950s? Prettier? I guess if you don't like seeing buildings, then you couldn't see any because of the haze, and that made it prettier. If you just can't see any of the city. Tucker, I know you don't like California, but even you have to admit that there's not as much smog, at least, right? But expanding on all of these topics, including other stuff that Tucker said, probably would make this video drag too much, so I'll end it there. So that's the situation. Unfortunately, climate change can increase this kind of unexpected weather events or changing the normal yearly weather that a certain region experiences. And if those regions don't take proper precautions to deal with those changing temperatures or changing precipitations or changing what have you, they could unfortunately experience failures like Texas. Luckily though, we have technology to handle a lot of this energy issues in terms of, in this case, winterization and cold proofing, but the more we keep pushing out fossil fuels, the worse this is going to get. So instead of looking at this as an opportunity in which we should be scared of renewables, it should be an opportunity that we look at and say, hey, climate change is a really big deal and we should stop making it worse. Because for how bad it is, for how bad it's going to get, it's always going to be worse the more carbon we spew into the environment. So the more changes we can make right now, the better, or at least less worse, life is going to be in the future. If you can and would like to offer some support to those in Texas suffering right now, I've linked to a couple resources in the description below. I also have a climate newsletter where I write about climate change and actions that we need to take before 2030 in particular. Follow me there. I currently write more than I make videos, and I go a little bit more in depth in the writing because it's a little easier to do when I'm writing. I don't have to do all of this video production. But that could change in the future. All of my sources for, say, this video is in a piece I did a couple days ago on there. And oftentimes, a video I'm gonna make here might be preceded by a newsletter I write there. So if you're interested in that, follow me there. If you're interested in more climate videos and other videos that I do, it's mainly gonna be climate, but I'm open to doing whatever I want to do because it's my channel. Then follow me here, subscribe, absolutely destroy the notification bell. Thank you for watching, and Tucker, if you ever watch this, even though I know you won't, just try to pedal it back a little bit. It's just kind of harmful to the globe and all the people on it. If you keep peddling the lie that climate change is some liberal hoax meant to just infringe on your rights, it's a very accepted thing by the entire world scientific community. And to everyone else, remember not to let Tucker, or the Kardashians for that matter, keep lying to you.